Locked On Grizzlies podcast. A lot of talk about the fact that the Grizzlies this year are 14-2 without Ja Morant. But if you're using that as one of your main arguments to judge the impact of Morant, I'm going to tell you why it's a pretty flawed perspective, and also discuss why the Grizzlies obviously are dominating to begin games and why Jaren Jackson Jr. is the key to the Grizzlies successfully ending games. That and much more on this edition of the Locked On Grizzlies podcast. Here we go.
Locked On Grizzlies, your daily Memphis Grizzlies podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Welcome one and all to the Locked On Grizzlies podcast. My name is Shawn Coleman, flying solo today. My co-host, Michael Cole, will be back with me many times the rest of this week as we certainly enjoy the ESPN exposure that comes on Wednesday with ESPN coming to Memphis as the Grizzlies take on the Brooklyn Nets. We'll have all the coverage for you, all of what to look forward to tomorrow's edition of the Locked On Grizzlies podcast with myself and Michael. Of course, you can find myself at Stats SAC, the show at Locked On Grizz, right here on YouTube. Hit that subscribe button below. My name is Shawn Coleman, credentialed media member with the Grizzlies. I've been covering the Grizzlies now for 4 years, right for them over at Grizzly Bear Blues, your host here at Locked On Grizzlies, your Grizzlies every single day. Of course, we want to let you know of the title sponsor to our show, BetOnline.net. Make sure when it comes to wagering and betting on sports, you go to the best place, the quickest and easiest way for you to bet online, and that's BetOnline.net. So we've heard a pretty consistent narrative this year that started when Ja Morant was out earlier in December. Went through a few games where he's been out in January and February and March. And the Grizzlies now are 14-2 without Ja Morant. And that's outstanding, right? It's absolutely excellent to see that the Grizzlies have been able to perform so well without their main player. But there is a continuing noise. There is a continuing, perspective narrative out there that the fact that the Grizzlies are 14-2 without Ja Morant should throw a bit of, cold water on the aspect of just how impactful Ja Morant is, just how valuable his actual play is. And my simple response to that narrative is this: it's flawed and it's false, and you need to stop it. That's straightforward. And everybody is entitled to their opinion, obviously. But the whole idea of the Grizzlies, just because they're 14-2 this year, if that is where you are going to stop, or if that is one of your main points in determining just how valuable Ja Morant is as a player, it's a flawed perspective. There's not a lot of there is less value in your perspective than the value you're trying to take away from Ja Morant. It's absolutely true. And the reason why that is let's start with the simple, straightforward response. Why would you want to put more emphasis on when a player, in terms of value in a player, of when he's off the court versus when he's on the court? That's the first thing that stands out to me. But one of the biggest things that also stands out to me is this narrative that the Grizzlies are that Ja Morant's not that impactful because the Grizzlies are 14-2 without him. My first ask would be, if anybody has that opinion, have you actually looked at the competition that the Grizzlies faced? The Grizzlies in the 16 games this year that they have played without Ja Morant are 14-2. But the biggest contributing factor as to why the Grizzlies are 14-2 in those games is because of those 16 games, there have only been 2 or 3 occurrences where the Grizzlies have actually faced a playoff level team, or a team that was at a playoff version of itself when they faced the Grizzlies without Ja Morant. Only 5 of the 16 occurrences have the Grizzlies faced a team that currently has a 500 better record or more. And when we faced a Dallas or a Miami or a Philadelphia, they've been without Luka, they've been without Embiid, they've been without Bam Adebayo. The Grizzlies' 14-2 record does not have without Ja, does not have anything to do with Ja. I know that should be obvious, but in no way, shape, or form should there be any type of major emphasis, validity, value about Ja Morant's overall impact there should be no level of relevance when it comes to Ja's impact that is placed on the fact that the Grizzlies are 14-2 without him. You're making it too complicated. And I know that people enjoy the narrative. They enjoy the buzzworthiness, for lack of a better word, the hot takes. That, oh, the Grizzlies are 14-2 without Ja Morant. He must not be that valuable. Where's this MVP talk coming from? I understand that there's a hot take. But for it to be actual value, for your opinion to actually be considered more of a hot take and to be valid, you got to have context. And when people say the Grizzlies' 14-2 record without Ja Morant should take away from the value of Ja Morant, all that is a hot take because they're ignoring context that shreds their logic. At the end of the day, the Grizzlies' 14-2 record without Ja Morant, it starts with the fact that the Grizzlies have simply faced a lot of competition that is of a lottery sense. Again, there's only been 2 or 3 of the teams that the Grizzlies have faced of those 16 teams who were actually at a level of being a playoff contender. If you want to bring up the fact that, a Desmond Bane or a Jaren Jackson Jr. or other players play better offensively, their numbers look better offensively without Ja without Ja than with Ja. Well, duh. They certainly do look better because they're having to take on more of an offensive load with Ja Morant out. And again, they're facing weaker competition than they usually would with Ja on the court. That's what stands out about this narrative about, the Grizzlies' record without Ja Morant. It actually has nothing to do with Ja. I know people want it to because it creates content. It's what drives headlines. It's what drives conversation. Obviously, it's leading to this conversation right now. But at the end of the day, when it comes to the Grizzlies' record without Ja Morant, that in of itself should tell you where the value of that Grizzlies record, where you should actually be pointing your attention. It's not about Ja Morant. It's further validation that the Grizzlies' success goes beyond Morant. It's more than Morant. The Grizzlies' 14-2 record without Ja Morant this year is proof that the Grizzlies are taking care of business when they should against teams that they're better than. And that's the trademark of a contender. That the Grizzlies' depth, which we've known now for 2 years, is a very important strength and trademark of this team. It steps up and stands out and produces to play winning basketball even when it's without its best player. And so that depth takes care of business. The emergence of Jaren Jackson Jr., Desmond Bane, and others, it takes care of business without Ja when it should against teams it should beat. But that continuity, that consistency, that ability to continue to step up and deliver value even in bigger roles when Ja Morant is out, that is what prepares this roster to support Ja, who you absolutely are going to need if you're the Grizzlies when you're facing the better competition in the NBA this season. So if you want your narrative, if you want your support to talk about the impact of Ja Morant, go look at the Grizzlies beating Utah on the road. Go look at the Grizzlies on back-to-back Mondays, beating Harden and Durant in the Nets, and then beating Booker and Paul with the Suns on the road. Go look at those examples. The overall support of a value of a player, the overall idea of Ja Morant as an MVP, support it with when he's actually on the court. That's the whole idea behind him being in the MVP conversation. Perhaps the most improved player, being an all-star starter, a first-team All-NBA player. It's what he does when he's on the court. When it comes to him being off the court, and I would be willing to bet Ja Morant himself would be the first one to tell you, it's more than Morant. It goes to the general manager, Zach Kleiman. It goes to Taylor Jenkins, the head coach. And most importantly, it goes to the group of guys who love playing with Ja Morant, but even more so, who love playing with Ja Morant, but also are fully capable of taking on the opportunity to remain competitive and a very good basketball team, even without Ja Morant. They can take care of business when they're supposed to. So the Grizzlies are 14-2 without Ja Morant. You damn right they are. But the reason why has nothing to do with Morant. It's how good, how deep, and how consistent this Grizzlies team has become. And it shows that while Ja Morant is a part of the equation, and he's the most important part of the equation, when this Grizzlies team continues to face better competition, especially in the playoffs, he again is just part of the reason why this Grizzlies team potentially is set up for a deep run, because of the depth, the defense, and the overall consistency this young core has certainly shown. I've slid my soapbox back underneath my desk here, so we're good to go. But just want to point out, if you hear any more talk about how the Grizzlies are doing without Ja Morant, that's perfectly fine. But make sure the attention and the value and the positivity that comes from that goes towards the roster, just like the overall positivity should continue to go towards Ja Morant with how well he performs when the Grizzlies are facing the best competition in the NBA. But the Grizzlies' success in these games goes beyond Morant, obviously, and it goes beyond even the personnel of the Grizzlies. It goes to how much pressure they put on teams early in games. We'll discuss that in just a moment. But before we do, obviously, when it comes to the Grizzlies, we always talk about when it comes to the Grizzlies, we want to see them exceed the odds. We want to see the Grizzlies be able to consistently perform, get double-digit wins, what have you, so on and so forth. And that's something that the Grizzlies have consistently done now for 3 months. Well, if you're someone that enjoys betting and wagering on sports, I can tell you this, I truly feel like the Grizzlies are one of the best bets out there. And the reason why is what we're going to talk about in just a moment, because they're one of the teams in the NBA, at least in the 2022 calendar year, who have done the best job of getting off to hot starts. Well, if you want to get off to a hot start when it comes to your betting and wagering on sports, there's no better place to do it than betonline.net, because it's the fastest and easiest way for you to bet and wager on the sports that you love, whether it be obviously the Sweet 16 in college basketball, pro basketball, boxing, UFC, baseball starting up, what have you. It's the fastest and easiest way to bet and wager on sports. So if it's easy for you to set up and it's easy for you to stay consistent on placing your bets, that gives you more time to focus on the bets that you truly feel you can win. Check out betonline.net today. Another thing that I can tell you about is that our next partner has a product that I use literally every day. I started taking Athletic Greens simply because of many different reasons. For one, it's lifestyle friendly. Whether you eat keto, paleo, vegan, dairy-free, or gluten-free, Athletic Greens contains less than 1 gram of sugar, no GMOs, no nasty chemicals, or artificial anything, while still tasting good. It supports better sleep quality and recovery, and it supports mental clarity and alertness. The great thing about Athletic Greens also is that it costs you less than $3 a day. You're investing in your health, and it's cheaper than your cold brew habit. It's cheaper than getting all the different supplements yourself. You're investing in an all-in-one nutritional insurance. And the great thing about the Athletic Greens is that the founder is not just someone saying this, he's actually lived it. Athletic Greens was created when the founder experienced a ton of gut health issues and ended up on a complicated supplement routine to recover. It cost him nearly $100 per day. To make it easy, Athletic Greens is going to give you a free 1-year supply of immune-supporting vitamin D. That's 1 year and 5 free travel packs with your first purchase. All you have to do is visit athleticgreens.com/NBA network. Again, that is athleticgreens.com/NBA network to take ownership of your health and pick up the ultimate daily nutritional insurance. We can't thank you enough for making Locked On Grizzlies your first listen of the day. But, of course, we're through the first weekend of the 2022 NCAA tournament. Obviously, there's 16 teams out there who are going to offer plenty of perspective of the Locked On podcast network of college shows. But there's also several reaction to teams that unfortunately are no longer in the running. Of course, when you want to talk about it, there's the Vols. But whenever you want to listen to March Madness updates, make sure after making Locked On Grizzlies your first listen of the day, you check out your favorite Locked On College podcast show that will give you the latest insight on all that's going on when it comes to March Madness. Well, speaking of fun and speaking of madness, if you will, when it comes to the Grizzlies create plenty of madness for their opponents when it comes to starting off basketball games. If you've noticed on our show, and if you've noticed watching the Grizzlies as of late, one thing that should ultimately stand out about this Grizzlies team, they're a lot of fun from the get-go. The Grizzlies have found the consistency. One of the biggest reasons why the Grizzlies have unexpectedly been able to emerge as the team with the second best record in the NBA is because we talk about playing a complete 48 minutes. But one of the things that stands out is that the Grizzlies absolutely are putting it on their opponents in the first 24 minutes. As a matter of fact, since the calendar year turned over to 2022, the Grizzlies lead the NBA in first quarter scoring. But the thing is that since February 1st, the Grizzlies actually are scoring more than 33 points per the first quarter, which is more than 2 points on average than any other team. Now, that may not seem like it's that big of a deal, but when you come to talking 12 minutes of basketball, that 2 points absolutely stands out as a big, big factor, and it is actually a significant distance between the Grizzlies and the rest of the league. And the Grizzlies aren't doing this because they're absolutely outshining teams. They're just shooting, at a non-sustainable pace or an unsustainable pace when it comes from three. The reason why the Grizzlies are getting off to such a good start, the reason why the Grizzlies are able to establish their tone in games is because from the onset, the Grizzlies are simply the more active and more consistent team at what they do best. Getting out on the run, scoring in the paint, getting offensive rebounds. The Grizzlies know how to establish their tone before their opposition makes adjustments. The Grizzlies are able to, before adjustments are made, and the game becomes a bit more structured, which puts the Grizzlies in more of a half-court, type setting when it comes to their offense, which is where they can struggle a bit. Before that happens, the Grizzlies, even though it's known what they're going to do, the Grizzlies being so good as they are at scoring in the paint, creating turnovers to turn offense or turn defense into offense, getting offensive rebounds, and passing the basketball, the Grizzlies absolutely are finding daylight to do that all day long when it comes to starting games. Obviously, Ja Morant getting off to a great start scoring, that certainly helps. Desmond Bane getting in rhythm early from three, that complements Ja Morant. You have Steven Adams rebounding and passing, allowing for the Grizzlies to not only establish the possession edge early, but also create better shot opportunities when they are in that half-court offense. Jaren Jackson Jr. making a big defensive presence. Obviously, Dylan Brooks as well. This starting lineup complements each other so well on both ends of the court with their skill sets that they're able to establish early the possession edge and also setting the tone that the game is going to be played at the Grizzlies level. And that is a big, big matter of importance for this Grizzlies team heading in the playoffs. This Grizzlies team is a team that is constructed to play with the lead. They are constructed with the way that they get out with their energy, with their youth, with their activity. Their goal for the Grizzlies, more than other teams, the goal for the Grizzlies is to establish their tone early. It's to use their activity to gain that lead. It's the ability for them to be able to wear teams down with how much they get out on the run, with how much they out-rebound you, with how much turnovers they create. They want to make the game go fast. They want to make the game go at a fast pace. They also want to put pressure on you and get you in foul trouble with how much they get in the paint. Pressure is how the Grizzlies lead to possessions, which is how they want to claim the leads and why they want to play ahead. Because at the end of the day, if the Grizzlies do not get the lead, if they're not playing ahead, and now the other team is, and that other team is setting the tone to where they're making the Grizzlies play more of a half-court offense, that's where the Grizzlies struggle a bit more. Their ability to find consistent shooting from the outside to support their overall ability to get to the rim in the half-court setting, that's why the Grizzlies perhaps struggle a bit when it comes to trying to come from behind. So that's why it's so important when it comes to the Grizzlies getting that early starting games and why they're so good at doing it. Their activity, their consistency in terms of doing the different things that they need to do in the miscellaneous parts of the game to be able to establish the lead, offensive rebounds, on the hustle, in the paint. This Grizzlies team, they know who they are. And we've talked about it before. Why are the Grizzlies, who don't have that good of a shooting presence consistently, who can show a bit of a weakness when it comes to defense, why are the Grizzlies still so good? It's because they embrace what they're good at. And even if what they're good at is not the most important aspects of things, offensive rebounding and the hustle and the paint, even if in today's game, those are not the most important aspects or most valuable aspects of the game. What does matter, what is valuable, is that if you are elite in many of those areas, it's going to make a difference. And if you can establish value-added play in many of those areas, it's going to make a difference. You're going to force teams to where if you can consistently play at your best doing those things, especially early on, that's where the Grizzlies apply pressure to other teams to where they make the other teams have to play at their best at whatever they're good at. So it's not at all insignificant that the Grizzlies get off to the hot starts that they do. And as a matter of fact, it becomes even more important, it becomes even more impressive, more critical, that if the Grizzlies get off to these hot starts due to shooting surges that could be provided to support Desmond Bane from Ja Morant getting hot, or Jaren, or Dylan, or Melton, or Zaire getting going from three as well. If the Grizzlies have that hot start to the game, but they're also complementing their inside scoring with shooting the three, that's where that offensive balance comes into play. And that is where the Grizzlies consistently are hard to beat. That's an example of why the Grizzlies are so good. Why I believe they're 25-3 and have won like 22 straight games when they have 25 or more assists and 10 or more threes. If the Grizzlies are establishing good ball movement and they're making their shots from distance to complement their productivity in the paint, especially early on, I'm not saying the Grizzlies are unbeatable, but I'm saying that's when they're playing at the best version of themselves, and that's when they can play with and beat anybody confidently in the league. So the Grizzlies' consistency of getting off to good starts, we saw last year and we saw earlier this year, the Grizzlies' inconsistency of doing that, it reared its ugly head many times in games. But now with the fact that the Grizzlies are consistently getting off to hot starts, it puts them in the position they want to be. It puts them in the position to where they are playing with the lead. And with what the Grizzlies are good at, they're much more effective with the lead than coming from behind. But while an important start to games is critical to the Grizzlies' success, the presence of one person himself is just as critical when it comes to the closing minutes. And that person is Jaren Jackson Jr. Myself and DeMichael Cole have talked about it multiple times. Jaren Jackson Jr. is the most critical component to this Grizzlies team going to where they want to go this year, and a big reason why is his productivity late in games. I'll discuss that in just a moment. But before we do, we were talking about Ja Morant earlier and how he's the most important part of the Grizzlies. He's the engine, obviously, and the rest of the parts of the Grizzlies, they run well off him. Well, if I'm making that sound like how an automobile runs, it's meant to be. Ja Morant's the engine, just like you want your engine to be running at the best possible way it can to make your car run the best it can overall. But in time, part upgrades are going to be needed. And as we go from the winter into the spring, you may need to make some upgrades as you get out more and start to travel more a bit over the next several months. Well, rockauto.com is the best place for you to do that. Within a few clicks of the button, you'll likely find what you need, because regardless of make and model or the part, rockauto.com is likely to have it. And I'll tell you this, regardless of your experience level, rockauto.com is there to help you, because listen, we know that car parts typically fall out of budget, but rockauto.com, a family-owned business for more than 20 years, they know that's the case. And so they make things as cost-effective as possible. When you visit rockauto.com, let them know the Locked On Podcast Network sent you. rockauto.com, amazing selection, reliably low prices, all the car parts you'll ever need. Visit rockauto.com today. Obviously, the Grizzlies are going to be welcoming Kyrie Irving, Kevin Durant, and the ESPN NBA coverage all coming to Memphis for tomorrow's game against the Nets. Me and DeMichael Cole will have all the coverage for you, what to look forward, how exciting it's going to be, so on and so forth. That and much more on tomorrow's edition of the Locked On Grizzlies podcast. But I know that I've talked about Jaren Jackson Jr., and obviously we know, let's be honest, Jaren Jackson Jr. has been streaky this year when it comes to his offense. I mentioned the stat before that when Jaren Jackson Jr. makes multiple threes, I believe the Grizzlies now are 27-6. So obviously, when he makes threes, when he is finding his shot from deep, and he's now complementing it with his ability to get into the lane and score, that is a big boost to the Grizzlies' overall ability to beat anyone in the NBA, to go along with Jaren's difference-making ability on defense as one of the best defenders in the NBA. I'll also say this, and I don't think that anybody's debating it anymore, but I want to reiterate, Jaren Jackson Jr. truly has been one of the best defenders in the NBA this season. But the thing that I'll say also is that the streakiness of Jaren Jackson Jr. at times can let a little bit be desired when it comes to his offensive game. And one of the things that probably, if we're talking about correlation, as I mentioned, it seems like the talk of correlation, it starts to come up a bit more as we get to the playoff stretch, because you've nearly got a full season of data or trends to look at. And so when we're talking about correlation for Jaren Jackson Jr., I haven't exactly looked at the numbers myself, but I will say that when Jaren Jackson Jr. gets those early fouls, obviously his overall numbers are going to go down a bit because he's likely going to play less games, but his impact goes down a bit as well. Jaren is very much a rhythm-type player. He is a player that needs to have his emotions supporting his overall efforts. And I don't mean that as a negative. It's just a young, talented player finding his groove, finding his consistency. And unfortunately, especially for a player who has built a lot of his confidence, has built a lot of his consistency off fouling less now than he has in the past, getting early fouls can knock him out of rhythm. And it unfortunately could lead to him not being as impactful as he needs to be, as he can be, and as the Grizzlies need him to be. And one of the biggest reasons why Jaren Jackson Jr.'s consistency, impact, what have you, needs to be at full force is because Jaren Jackson Jr. truly is one of the biggest difference makers in the fourth quarter in the NBA. And I'm not just saying that because he plays well in some fourth quarters where the Grizzlies need him, because he's made some highlights where the Grizzlies need them. I'm saying it because the numbers truly do back it up. In the fourth quarter this year, there is no player anywhere close to Jaren Jackson Jr. when it comes to the numbers correlating, when it comes to his production correlating to wins. Coming into the game against the Rockets on Sunday, Jaren Jackson Jr. was at a plus 48 in terms of total plus minus. The Grizzlies have outscored their opponents by 48 points in the fourth quarter this year with Jaren Jackson Jr. on the court. The next best number for the Grizzlies is John Conchar with plus 18. So we're not even talking about a player, no disrespect to John Conchar. We're not even talking about a player, though, in John Conchar, who typically is out there in high leverage moments, in closing moments, when the best of the opposition is on the court and the Grizzlies' best is out there as well. So there is really not a Grizzlies player who has come close to the positive impact Jaren Jackson Jr. has made in the fourth quarter of this season. And the reason why he's made such an impact, he is an absolute eraser in the fourth quarter. Jaren Jackson Jr. now, I believe, has 20 more fourth quarter blocks this season than any other player in the NBA. 18 to 20. It was 18 going into the Houston game. That is correct. And we've seen it so many times. I told you that, earlier in this conversation that Jaren's value in the fourth quarter isn't because of the highlight blocks that we seem to see every week, but those certainly display one of the reasons why he's so impactful in the fourth quarter, because he makes game-changing plays in close games. He makes big defensive stops that not only obviously play to the Grizzlies' favor because it prevents scoring, but it's that momentum shift. We talk about these cycles where Jaren can make one play on the defensive end, then go down and convert it into a basket on the offensive end. I feel like the most consistent we see him doing that is in the fourth quarter. So his defensive activity is absolutely incredible in the fourth quarter. As a matter of fact, I won't necessarily go to say he's the best fourth quarter defender in the NBA, but I will back all day long he's a top 5 fourth quarter defender in the NBA this season. And every bit of it has been huge in getting the Grizzlies several wins this year. So yes, the main reason why Jaren is so impactful in the fourth quarter and why he needs to be out there on the court is truly his defense. But beyond all else, it's his two-way ability. This season, Jaren Jackson Jr. has become the only player in the NBA over the past 25 years when quarter stats really started being retained. There has been no other player in the NBA over the past 25 years that has 50 or more fourth quarter blocks and 25 or more fourth quarter threes. The only player who's done that is Jaren Jackson Jr. Now, no, he's not towards the top of the league leaderboards when it comes to fourth quarter shots. No, he's not shooting significantly better from three in the fourth quarter compared to other quarters. But it is when he's on. But the fourth quarter this year is the moment Jaren is putting on display what makes him so unique. Being one of the biggest defensive difference makers in the league on the defensive end, while also adding consistent shooting to give the Grizzlies the balance that they need on the offensive end. And it's been huge, right? Yes, the Grizzlies' overall fourth quarter offense is not where their first quarter offense is. That's because adjustments have been made by the Grizzlies' opposition. And though that opposition has gotten more tired because of the pressure the Grizzlies have put on them, they've also, the especially good teams, they've made adjustments between the first and the fourth quarter to make life tougher for the Grizzlies to score. Well, Jaren's overall shooting ability, when he's on the court, that is a nice option to have to counter those adjustments that other teams have made. So we certainly have seen discussion out there when it comes to Taylor Jenkins. Why is Jaren not on the court even with when he's in foul trouble? There's a reason behind those questions, in my opinion. And I think Taylor Jenkins truly is a top 3 Coach of the Year candidate. He knows far more. He's forgotten more about basketball than I'll ever know. That's just goes with him being an NBA coach. But the one area that I would certainly love to see is Jaren being put out there on the court, even if he has foul trouble. Because at the end of the day, that's when you're putting the Grizzlies in their best position to win, because you're putting one of the biggest difference makers on the team out there when it means the most close games late. But also, here's the biggest thing, the biggest takeaway of all, when it comes to Jaren in foul trouble versus Jaren being on the court and being a difference maker. The only way for a player like Jaren, who needs to be in rhythm, who needs to be in his groove, the only way that he is going to consistently be in that groove late in games, even if he has foul trouble, is repetition. You've got to give him the opportunity to remain productive, to remain competitive, to remain in that groove, even if he has foul trouble late in games. And the only way that you do that is repetition. Putting him out there consistently. That's what's going to give the Grizzlies the best chance to win games during this tough stretch from March into April. And if you do that, putting him out there, even if he has foul trouble, if you do that, put him out there to be the difference maker he could be in the fourth quarter against playoff level opponents like the Grizzlies are going to be playing over the next few weeks, that could do a lot of benefit to help him be in the best position to return good production and help you win a few games in the playoffs. Ja Morant is your most important player. There is no doubt about that. But Jaren Jackson Jr. has proven that in high leverage and closing situations, he can be perhaps just as big of a difference maker as Ja when it comes to his play on both ends of the court. He's got to be given the opportunity to consistently do that, though, even if he's in foul trouble, to make him best prepared to be that consistent difference maker, but also give the Grizzlies the best chance to win games against quality competition, especially when it comes to the playoffs. This show's been a lot of fun. Thank you so much for listening, as always, to the Locked On Grizzlies podcast. You can find me at StatsSAC, the show at Locked On Grizz, right here on YouTube. Hit that subscribe button below. Thank you for all your support. Make sure to read Michael Cole's awesome content this week. Obviously, the conversation with Stephen A. Smith, he's going to have plenty more things coming out, and we'll have plenty more for you, especially on tomorrow's show with ESPN Day in Memphis. Thanks so much. Have a great day. We'll talk to you again soon here on the